This week, the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, made two big announcements. One was the introduction of Chapter or US Chapter 11 style insolvency framework for small business, and the other was the removal of responsible lending obligations for banks. Together, these are arguably the two most consequential changes to laws impacting family business in Australia in decades. My name's Nick Samios. I'm the fund manager and director here at Hermes Capital, and I am your Lunch Money host. Lunch Money is the home, a social media and online home for special situations, workouts and capital raising professionals. And welcome. If you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe. And you're also able to subscribe to us on your favourite podcasting platform, be that Apple, Google or whatever. This week, we turn the spotlight on family business and we ask how are family businesses coping with the challenges of 2020 and how can they do it better? I've got two fantastic guests to lead us through that discussion. And our first guest is Sally Nicholes, Managing Partner of Nicholes Family Law. G'day, Sally. How are you going?
Hi, I'm really well, thanks, Nick. How are you?
I'm fantastic, thank you. Tell me, what is it that has been keeping you busy the last couple of weeks?
Oh, well, I think there's been an increase in inquiries, in particular in family law, and that was predicted prior to lockdown. But particularly in Victoria, where I'm based, we've really seen, unfortunately, an increase in domestic violence, also in issues that relate to economic abuse. So very, very timely. Your introduction really impacts on me in that way. So I've been dealing with clients and also just the challenges of being remote. We haven't seen a live client since March, but it's been buzzing along.
That's incredible. And so it's not just folklore. These things are putting pressures on families and relationships.
Oh, incredibly. And as you know, we've done a series of podcasts where we've really unpacked COVID, the financial strain, people just even having to unpack JobKeeper, for example, when that actually happened. And now when we have valuations of assets, and particularly family businesses, we're really having to be versatile and actually investigate COVID and try and look at the outcomes, because nobody, I think, in March predicted that this would last as long as it has. So we're really having to work in with experts such as yourself and Mark, who's appearing shortly, on how we actually navigate that commercially for our clients, but also to dealing with the real impact of women in particular and children being subjected to domestic violence, and still knowing that it's not acceptable at any time, but particularly now, and that the courts and police are very, very aware of the situation, and they really want people and victim survivors, we call them, to reach out, particularly in all sorts of areas, including economic abuse.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, look, it's got to be really hard in Victoria. I mean, it's beyond, it's beyond joking about. It's just terrible. Whenever I see people in Victoria, they're doing it tough. They're putting on a brave face and all the rest of it. And hopefully it'll be over soon. Tell me something. I mean, one of these, I was saying a bit earlier. This is our 27th episode of Lunch Money, and the reason we started this was because we were all locked in and. I met you over lunch. I think it might have been one of the last lunches I actually had.
Remember that?
Yeah, exactly. The good old days. But and so we've been doing this as a way of staying in touch with our networks. But you've also been doing a bit of podcasting. You want to just briefly tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Well, what I was doing, I was actually talking to one of the really eminent and wonderful women's NGOs, WIRE, the Women's Information Referral Exchange, to their CEO, Julie Kuhn, about her prediction that domestic violence was going to go through the roof, and particularly because of financial pressures. And what could we really do? Because we often do a series of live presentations to actually assist WIRE and other NGOs in need. And I said, well, what about a series of podcasts? We do have the facilities. I had all my team immediately go remote very, very quickly in March, and we realised there was an ability to make podcasts. And we had a young fellow working for us who's a budding film director and editor. So we actually did that, but we unpacked all the different aspects of COVID and attempted to address them, but also including domestic violence. We interviewed CEOs, including the CEO of Panda, that looks after parents who are expecting babies and have just had a baby, because they had lost access to midwives, for example. Yeah, so that was really great. And we looked at cyber safety, interviewed the Australian federal police, looked at everything that we thought could impact on families,
Yeah.
but we also did look at financial hardship as well.
And that's ongoing, isn't it? Because I found that with these things, you never run it out. You never run out of topics.
No.
Yeah.
No, sadly, and for us too, the challenge was to make sure that we could actually look after clients. But fortunately or unfortunately, we've actually had an increase in cases, but the nature of them the emotions are quite heightened, and that's really sad. And having to keep my own team on track with their mental health, given we're all remote and we don't have that same camaraderie that we normally do have when we're actually in the office and working as a team on a matter, has been a challenge. But we've still got very vulnerable people that we're looking after. We have that great empathy, but we're meeting them like I'm meeting with you today on Zoom, and it's a different world.
It is
really
a different
is.
world. It is a different world.
Mm.
It's funny. Yeah, I mean, the little things on Zoom. I heard that patterned shirts are going out of fashion because they're no good on Zoom. But yeah.
Well, I don't know what's
I'm,
happened with my filter today. As I said, I've got some sort of creamy filter today, and it's not intentional. I'm actually thinking maybe my camera's not clean or something.
can say that what we'll do is we'll put a link to your podcast in our promotional materials post this, so people can check in on that. The production values are fantastic, and it's great. So I'm going to just pop you back into the waiting room, Sally, and we're going to introduce our next guest. It's Mark Robinson, who is an insolvency partner at the DVT Group. G'day, Mark. How are you going?
Good, thanks, Nick. Really well. Fantastic. At least I'm wearing a patterned shirt. Yeah.
There you go. There you go. I must say we're privileged to have you back again. You were one of our early guests, and you were very popular, I must say. Tell me, what's been keeping you busy the past week or so?
A bit like Sally, first green shoots of increased inquiry from SME businesses and individuals about, what the future looks like in terms of government support measures being dialed back. And I've also been looking at a small public company, unlisted public company group in terms of a restructure, very IP heavy and very reliant on the next injection of equity to get them through to the other side. So many and various, and it's a bit of a relief that the phone's starting to ring a bit more.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting. I mean, everybody knows the insolvency sector. There's been articles in the paper about it. It's been very quiet, So with all the JobKeeper and etc. keeping everybody afloat, how do you value intellectual property in a market like we have today?
Oh, look, excellent question. And in terms of a public company restructure, it does need to get valued, and you need the independent expert reports to attest to that. But yeah, if it's an IP that's never generated a profit, notwithstanding the costs of developing that IP have been significant, and there's worldwide patents on it. Yes, that is the question. What is it worth? And we've got to bring in the experts to be able to do that for us.
I mean, are you gearing up to be busy this side of Christmas, the other side of Christmas?
I think the best guess, but I've got a small wager with my partners on that one. They were originally latter part of this year. I was a bit more bearish and was sort of more looking at around February, March of next year. I think the needle's more swinging my way, but certainly the phones have. Starting, albeit slowly now. So, my best guess would be February, March next year.
And we might just bring Sally back. Okay. Now, I had a bit of an interesting SMS exchange with the Treasurer the other day, which I thought I might share with you. It was on Wednesday, about lunchtime Wednesday. He's basically said, "Hey, bruh, what's on lunch money this week?" And I've responded, "Well, we're talking about family business, but I've got no idea what we're going to talk about." And he's responded with "Hold my beer." So he certainly delivered to give us some topics to talk about. I thought we might start, Mark. The question on everybody's lips is about these new insolvency laws, and sort of keeping it. I guess they really very much apply to the family business sector, don't they? Because they're talking maximum debt $1 million. Do you want to just give us a snapshot of how you think that'll impact on small business?
Oh, you're quite right, Nick. Yes, certainly focused at SMEs, which are predominantly family-owned businesses, which is pertinent to today's discussion. Targeted at businesses with less than $1 million net unsecured debt. It's a streamlined process, so trying to strip out costs in the process. It's also a debtor in possession style model, which is more taking Australia towards international norms in dealing with micro and small businesses. And that's also pertinent to our discussion about family businesses, because proprietors of family businesses are very proprietorious, and so they're not wanting to hand it over to an administrator. So for them to have the catalyst to do something, that if they remain in charge or in possession during the process, that's a good thing. And it also, I think it's good because it's encouraging small businesses that have been in hibernation and maybe not turning their mind to their financial position, particularly post government support measures. It's actually flushing them out to actually have a serious look and see whether these new measures are that they can utilise.
Right. So that's bringing it down, sort of making people think about the possibilities rather than sticking their head in the sand, perhaps. This debtor in possession. So not all of our audience are insolvency savvy. I mean, typically when a company becomes insolvent, accountants such as yourself, Mark, actually are formally in control of the business, whether it's an administration or a receivership. But what debtor in possession means that what the company is going through an insolvency process, it's looking at plans to reorganise, but the actual directors or owners of the business stay in control. What I'm wondering now, I appreciate, Sally, that insolvency is not necessarily your bailiwick, but I'm thinking that one of the advantages of having an administrator, someone external come in, is that they're taking the pressure off. It's someone else to blame, like they can have the hard conversations with the staff, and maybe it's a bit of a pressure valve release.
Look, I think the administrator can play such a fantastic role, particularly for a company in distress. So even prior to COVID or prior to this recession that we're expecting, we would actually sometimes seek applications in the family court using our accrued jurisdiction that we would be applying in the federal court anyway, to actually see if we could actually have a company go into administration. And again, not to try and wipe an asset or to actually try and preserve it. And that's what the courts are really interested in, to sustain assets for a matrimonial division. And sometimes, given the different agendas that have gone around, people have actually overplayed their hand and run down companies. So to actually have an honest broker in, and I've had some fabulous administrators in who we've worked really well with, because we all want a family business to survive a marital breakup, for example. It's in everyone's interest. It's providing income, for example, to put kids through school, and it's got valued employees. So it can actually be a really good news story.
Interesting, Mark. I mean, what do you think about that sort of pressure valve release? As I say, sometimes, there have to be hard conversations had, maybe with other family members in the business, whether it's spouse, siblings, parents, and the administrator can sort of do the dirty work in those regards. I mean, do you think, how would that play out under this new regime?
Well, under the new regime, the proprietor's got to engage a practitioner, and that practitioner is called a small business restructuring professional. Certainly can be a registered liquidator like myself, but there might well be a new category of practitioner with slightly less qualifications that qualifies for this practitioner that gets involved in the process. So whilst the debtor is in possession, they're not on their own. They've got to engage an accredited expert, and that accredited expert has got to assist the business proprietor in formulating a plan, and then at the end of formulating that plan, that practitioner has got to certify that plan is achievable. And so in going through that process, I think a lot of the hard discussions that need to be had can still be had, notwithstanding that the proprietor remains in possession of the business.
So you think the new small business restructuring professional, whatever it's called, they can still have those hard conversations and act as a pressure valve?
I think so, because their practitioners got to be comfortable that the family dynamics, for example, are conducive to a continuing viable business going forward. Otherwise, the projected returns to creditors isn't going to be achievable, and that practitioner is required to certify that those returns are achievable, and that certification won't be forthcoming unless fundamental issues such as those are resolved.
I've got an example of a difficult conversation in a family business.
You're my older brother, and I love you. But don't ever take sides with anyone against the family again.
That's a hard conversation. I mean, every business has its Fredo. So I guess that's well, not every business, sorry, but there are situations where there are Fredos. Just moving sort of spotlight a little bit away. Sally, you mentioned. You sort of touched on the concept of valuations, and I've got this thing where I say, mum or dad comes home every night, from a long day at the office or at the mine site or wherever it is they work, and they tell the family, we're rich, we're millionaires, my business is worth, our business is worth $10 million, everything's fantastic. But of course, then when there is a bump in the road, whether it's an administration or some sort of breakdown, all of a sudden the valuations can be a little bit of disappointment. Is that something that you found?
In terms of the reality of what people, their perceptions, they can be a disappointment, but also too, people unfortunately become a little bit strategic. But yes, there can be an unrealistic attitude if they're overinvested, if they haven't had objective advice and advisors. Sometimes you find, particularly working with accountants or the company accountant too close sometimes to the business. So we actually do have to get external experts to help us with valuation issues.
Is that where you've got, for example, someone's running the business down deliberately, planning ahead? What are sort of some of the dirty tricks that you see?
Oh, they start up new companies or they actually convince their spouse to actually resign from directorships and shareholdings. And often too, they're disempowered or to be too gender specific, but sometimes the wife might not realise that resigning a directorship gives up a whole lot of commercial rights and access to information and decision making. For example, lending, and then that can lead to people actually taking out loans to actually affect the balance sheet and the valuation. And that's something where we have to sometimes have independent forensic investigators who are experts, obviously like Mark with his expertise too, that the forensic accountants will actually try and unpick that to see there's been something deliberate to actually decrease the value of that company. And you can actually get injunctive relief if you find that has been the case. But it's very messy and it's very hard for somebody who's not commercially savvy. But often the company accountant is very wedded to the person who they feel is in control of the company as well.
This is the sort of, you're often finding yourself leading the charge on these things?
Yes, absolutely. And it doesn't pass the smell test. I obviously haven't got Mark's expertise, but I've been doing it long enough, and that you can tell the types of behaviours or their responses to queries for information where we're trying to simply be commercial and find out a true commercial value, and then it's suddenly we can see the sides, the activity through searches where people are actually divesting themselves and particularly putting pressure on the partner to remove themselves from the corporate structure. That's a very big signal to us that something untoward's going on. And I'm sure Mark could relate to that as well. It's a bit like oppression of minority shareholders. Sometimes you're running that type of case.
Yeah, that's interesting. You talk about those strategies. It reminds me, many years ago, I had a client. We'd loan money against business assets, but we also had a collateral mortgage, and there was a lot of equity in the mortgage theoretically. And then one day there was he up and left and disappeared overseas with the receptionist, as it turns out. He really lived the cliche. But in the process, basically stole all the assets and turned those into cash. And the last conversation I managed to have with him before he went overseas, he said, "Don't worry, just sell the house." So he sort of used that as a strategy of, basically stealing money from his spouse. Mark, do you think will these new insolvency laws help that situation, or help navigate these sort of family issues at all?
I think so. You don't want continuing businesses that are losing money, putting more strain on the family business. So they need to either restructure and resolve their issue, or if they can't do that, it's best to maybe even liquidate to stop the financial drain. Certainly, getting back to Sally's point around valuations and actually, what is the core value of a business? We certainly have that expertise in-house. Suella McCallum does do that. So, we certainly try and get to the nub of, the true value, the core value of a business as part of the assessment as to whether we've got something that's worth saving.
Yeah, well, then, of course, you've got dueling value as his and hers. All right, look, we might just move away from that. The other big gift that Josh Frydenberg gave our podcast this week, he's talking about doing away with responsible lending obligations. So responsible lending came in the last GFC. Personally, I thought that it was an Australian reaction to an American problem. We never really had ninja loans in Australia, no income, no job. It was a feature on the American landscape. And if you've seen that movie that escapes my thinking right now, you know all about that. But now Josh Frydenberg's saying of doing away with responsible lending obligations for the banks to free up money. Is this going to? I'll put the question to you first, Sally. Is this something that's going to help free up money to help family business formation and expansion, or is it just going to be another sexually transmitted debt trap?
I think it's both, because I think the commercial side of looking at family businesses struggling and people really needing to inject funds, I think it's actually a really positive step. So I really support it commercially. And again, we can actually rescue and salvage businesses. It's in everyone's interest, whether they're in a relationship breakdown or not. So on the one hand, I think it's good news, because I think I've seen some disasters with the restrictions where people are really desperate to salvage a business and need that flexibility with their banker. And there's been, as the Australian article today said, there's been some really unrealistic restrictions put on borrowings. But then on the other hand, you have to make sure that everyone's paying it straight, and that both parties are actually informed. And if you look at the constituent documents to a company, so that for those who don't know what I'm talking about, the trust deeds and the governing documents, and to make sure that if you, for example, take out a loan and you include your partner, who may be a director, that they understand that the proper sign-off is there, and also that you're not breaching any of the directors' duties, because some directors, as you know, may have a say in lending, borrowing, division of income stream, and sometimes I find that partners, one partner feels that they actually are the true decision maker, and we actually can use that if there's a breach of any of those constituent documents. That will really support injunctions and the return of income, and actually might even undermine a spouse being a guarantor for a large amount of money for that company.
Right. Do you think it'll impact on guarantees? Or
yes. No, I mean providing a guarantee. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I've already seen that happen, and I think that all those dots and T's must be crossed. Everything must be, I think, looked at carefully, because I think this might expose people to more risk of when there's not proper consent and people are ill-informed, and that power imbalance comes into play. So we have all the same commercial principles about unconscionability and informed consent play out in the family court as well. So people need to be very careful.
Right. So what you seem to be saying is that it's basically, you think it's a good idea that businesses can access the capital, but probably whilst the responsible lending will assist the banks, they're still going to need to take all the usual precautions with vulnerable guarantors.
And comply with all their trust rules and rules of equity as well in relation to unconscionable conduct and informed consent.
Right. What do you think, Mark, about these responsible lending obligations coming off?
Oh, look, I think it's a great opportunity for family-owned businesses. The freeing up of credit that this opportunity gives to the market. I mean, one of the burning issues with family-owned businesses is succession. Over the last 10, 15 years, we've seen a significant increase in the average age of proprietors of, family-owned businesses to, I think, to the effect now that the average age of a proprietor of a family-owned business is beyond retirement, normal retirement age. So, there needs to be a catalyst out there, I think, in terms of a catalyst to affect, the succession or the handing down to the next generation, or even a trade sale or whatever's going to occur. And I think, availability of capital and the filling up of that capital to achieve that transaction, will greatly assist. And I think also, in this COVID environment where fair market values of businesses have declined, the combination of increased availability of capital, declining values, hopefully will be the catalyst where we'll see family-owned businesses handed down to the next generation.
You think that the responsible lending has been an obstacle to passing on a business, to handing it down?
Well, it's certainly been one of many factors, but access to capital. The incoming new generation might have the ideas, in terms about digitising a business or taking it to the next step, and so they are the future of the business, but they're capital light. Certainly, the incumbent generation wants a comfortable retirement, so they're not give up their position without proper compensation. So I've seen this lack of capital quite often being, or lack of well-priced capital, being a stumbling block in a lot of succession sort of issues and family council sort of discussions.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, we're getting onto the sort of topic of succession there. And Sally, I'm just thinking of intergenerational issues. I mean, one big issue that I've encountered many times, I'm sure we all have, I'm sure Mark has as well, you have the business, mum or dad, or maybe mum and dad had the business and it was a really successful business. Mum and dad decide, we're going to go and get the caravan and travel around Australia and hand the keys over to the kids. And then, over the next 2 years, the kids absolutely destroy the business. I guess, do those sort of issues ever cross your desk, Sally?
They do in terms of issues of protecting keeping the wealth in the family, really, and also obviously on valuation issues and who actually controls the company too. So we have my debate, because my specialty is matrimonial law and relationship breakdown, is that often when we're trying to value a company or actually identify who owns it, if you have complex trust structures and where some adult kids are actually appointors of the trust with one of the spouses, it does muddy up ownership. So I'd probably, from my area, it's protecting the family wealth through what we colloquially call prenups, but where they're binding financial agreements, and ensuring that they actually are appropriately drawn and equitable with some of the new case law. But also, for example, if you try and actually remove someone's inheritance or interest in a company from another spouse, you really do need to work in with the commercial lawyers to understand the structure. And as you said before, with those expectations, Mark, comes some consideration and has true consideration being paid. So that's probably where my angle comes from. But it is a very live issue, and some people wanted to also rule from the grave. So working with estate planners as well in terms of these prenups, they can actually be quite a lengthy and sophisticated document to make sure that the following generations actually get their inheritance, and spouses can't actually come in and actually include that in the matrimonial pool, and that it's quite complex.
I can see why you mentioned earlier that sometimes there is an appointment of an administrator, because I guess while all that's going on, if things are nasty, the value, there could be real destruction of value to the business.
Sometimes people actually enter into administration on a false basis, and so then again, I need someone like Mark to tell me, what do you think about this? Is this actually is this legitimate? And I have actually, in fact, run a case where we actually overturned the appointment of administrator, and that's quite highly unusual. But again, through our accrued jurisdiction, commercial jurisdiction, we actually did that because it was a sham. And we've had a few sham bankruptcies too.
Mark, has this, the sort of scenario I described with the business being passed down to the next generation, do you think, have you seen any instances, or do you think that this COVID situation has impacted on that at all?
Well, look, I think COVID to an extent has exacerbated it. I mean, the way well-structured family-owned businesses sort of cope with that intergenerational dynamic, and also maybe the lack of skills and experience of the younger generation coming through, is to have outsiders, properly qualified and experienced outsiders, be they accountants or industry experts, and to have those sort of people on your family council or your governance advisory board or whatever structure you've got in your family business. That costs money, and some of those safety net sort of governance areas due to lack of funds through COVID have been let go. So I would surmise that much like in the matrimonial way that Sally has experienced through COVID, that pressures have built up. I suspect in family-owned businesses, those sort of family dynamic disputes have probably amped up over the COVID period.
I'm just sort of cycling back to this concept of business valuation, Sally. I imagine that business valuations have probably come off with all this COVID, particularly in Melbourne. If you had anything that was in the hospitality sector, and I guess when there is a family dispute, and you're sort of working out who gets what. Has that played into it? Has that affected?
Significantly. There are cases where people are fighting to resolve the issue immediately, because I think it'll be in their interest, where the company really is a shell of what it used to be, and it's time they try and resolve it as soon as possible. Others are deferring. But there are other companies that are going gangbusters, and we've had situations where people have actually tried to say, let's have a pre-COVID valuation, and we're quite no, because again, it's that smell test, because you can see that if it's a particular type of industry which is actually doing extremely well, then you can actually, you really legally, you need to take the value as of the date that you actually settle matters. So if you're wanting to settle right now, you need to take COVID valuations, but then some people, again, sensibly, if there's a company struggling, I'm really all for get that company up and going again. Let's see. So it just depends what type of asset we're talking about.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, it's not unusual. I mean, that he keeps the business, she gets the house, sort of thing, or vice versa. What do you see in this in that regard, Mark, with respect to sort of dampened valuations?
Well, I think particularly in industries that have been uniquely impacted by COVID, let's call it hospitality, let's call it, for example, pubs and clubs. I think the only fair way to value is on the basis that they cross to the other side, and based on future cash flows and future likely cash flows, to actually base it on a pure COVID valuation is probably not fair, particularly in a family court style dispute environment. Rather than just looking at the historicals over the last 5 years, I think valuations have got to be more forward focused, and what does the business look like when it crosses to the other side.
Okay, look, we are running out of time, but I would like to throw you both what in America they'd call a curveball, but I'm going to call it a googly. Imagine you've got 60 seconds with. One of the things that's happening is that I understand that the franchise industry, a lot of people are looking at buying into franchises. Maybe they've lost their jobs, or they've found that with COVID, their normal employment is not so steady as it used to be, and they're looking at getting into business. If you've got 60 seconds with a married couple about to go into a business of some sort during these times, what would your advice to them be? I'll start with you, Mark.
Look at the franchise agreements and look at the history and profile of that franchised organisation, and speak to as many other parties who have been within that franchise for a number of years. Not only those that are currently successful, but those that have exited out the other side. And just in terms of what their experience has been, my concern with franchises is that there are many layers with revenue. The ticket gets clipped at various levels up and down the chain, and then also there's a lot of power up the chain to step in and basically deny you your business if things go awry for whatever reason. So, a good legal review, a good business review, and you get what you pay for.
Yeah, I really agree with Mark wholeheartedly to really look into that franchisee agreement, because I've done a couple of cases for some of the bigger franchises, and they actually have their own valuation methodology as well, and that's really made me deep dive into what the situation actually is. And for example, something like McDonald's, you don't own the freehold, so you're really looking at, and you've got very strict regulations in terms of how much money you put into the corporation, and depending on the demographic and the location too of your actual McDonald's store, for example, will really there are big differences in income earning capacity too, and often there's economies of scale that it might be far more profitable to actually have to own a couple. Rather than one, but it really depends upon the location. So I found those absolutely fascinating, and also that we're not bound by the normal valuation methodologies. They've got their own valuation methodology, and they won't move outside of that. So that's something too that's really interesting to know about. But you can imagine some of those franchisees that are located at the airports, for example, or just outside the airports, or we're reliant upon tourism or people driving to the snow, for example, they will be largely impacted on. So again, at least I think they've got through delivery. But it's just something you have to just really get into that broad industry knowledge, and we have to when we're looking at a case too. It's quite different.
Okay, well, look, believe it or not, it always amazes me how quickly the time goes by, and we're actually out of time. So I'd like to thank you very much, Sally Nicholes. Thank you. Really, it's been fantastic having you on. I really appreciate you coming on. So thank you.
Pleasure.
And Mark Robinson, thank you for being a second timer. It's been great to have you back as well.
Much enjoyed it. Thanks very much, Nick.
Okay, well, thank you very much to all of our live viewers, and a special hello to everybody who listens later on audio and on YouTube over the weekend. Thank you very much again. Cheers.